Welcome to the Homeschool Together podcast. Where one working mom and a stay-at-home dad help you navigate the nuts and bolts of the growing and dynamic world of homeschooling.
With a focus on early learners, like me.
All the ins and outs of building and maintaining your homeschool life.
Homeschool.
Find out tips and tricks to make things like this easier.
I'm reading.
And ultimately, enjoy educating your kids. And what's that last thing?
Have fun together. Did I do good, Daddy?
Yeah, you did, sweetie. Good job. Hello and welcome to Homeschool Together. Thanks so much for joining us. If you have a chance, head down into the show notes and see all the awesome links that we have for you. If you could leave us a review on the iTunes, that would be wonderful. Just go on over there. Don't click the 4-star or the 3-star. We're a 5-star family here. 5 stars.
Well, we appreciate any reviews that we can get. It obviously helps other people to take this podcast seriously, and we put a lot of hard work into it. So we appreciate everyone leaving a review. And if you're listening today and you're not subscribed, if you want to hit that subscribe button, that really helps us move up in the rankings too. So we appreciate it.
Only 5 stars, people.
You don't have to listen to him. No pressure, anybody. But today we're super excited because we have a spring 2-part extravaganza.
Explosion extravaganza. Absolutely. You know, obviously in the Wayback Machine, someone might be listening to this after the fact. It's late March. It's starting to get warm. My gosh, we were outside in the sun today. It was magical.
I pulled out my hammock today. I'm just going to say it.
Yeah,
I know that it was premature, but I enjoyed it. I'll have to put it away for a while longer, I'm sure, but it was good while it lasted.
Yep, it's getting beautiful. Everybody is thinking about, I think a lot of people have on their minds, potentially growing some food this year. And so that's the next 2 episodes are going to be kind of keying in on that idea and just talking a little bit about, you know, the ideas and the concerns and the thoughts you might need to have going into something. This is your first time, or even if you're an experienced gardener and you've got the little ones running around, you know, maybe just reset kind of what you're thinking and utilize, you know, this wonderful resource that we have in our backyard, wonderful sun, soil, and a few seeds. It's magical what can happen.
It's such a great homeschool opportunity.
Especially
there's
in the
so
summer.
many,
especially it's a summer thing where a lot of homeschool families will stop.
It's wonderful. There's so many amazing things to learn by being outside and growing either food or flowers or whatnot together. So we wanted to touch on that today and just see if we can, you know, give you some food for thought about where to start, all the things that you can learn gardening with your kids and how it can enhance your homeschool. So, but we ended up having so much, we couldn't put it all into just one episode.
Yeah. So the first episode here is we're going to, I think, focus more on kind of the philosophy of bringing your kids into the garden or creating a garden space, kind of the ideas around that. And I think the follow-up episode, we're going to kind of get more into the nuts and bolts, just ideas and priorities. And
Matt is being like, he's bearing the lead here that he is a master gardener, WSU trained master gardener.
Was former until
I think it counts. Once a master gardener, always a master gardener.
I realized it was nothing more than a work program for old lady master gardeners and keeping up their gardens.
Yeah, it was Matt and all the retirees taking the master gardener class and then answering questions at the local Hagen. But your knowledge is vast, sir. We're hoping we're going to combine the homeschool part of this with all of Matt's wonderful gardening knowledge. So if you've never gardened before, you always thought that looked cool, but you have no idea what to grow and no idea where to start, and you're not sure how you can wrap your homeschool into all of this, these are the episodes for you. We are here to answer some of these questions, and we'll do our best. So maybe we should get right into it.
Absolutely, yeah. So, you know, a lot of times there are different types of gardens. You know, some people may actually just be starting their first garden. They're kind of wondering what to do, you know, how to set it up, you know, where's the space, how big do I go, you know, what do I grow, and all those type of questions. You know, there's other families that have more experienced gardens. You know, maybe they've been gardening for a little while. They've got, you know, maybe 1,000 square feet in garden production, or, you know, maybe you're one of those families that, you know, has a small farm and you've got a half acre of produce that you grow every year. You know, thinking about
this might not be for you.
No, I think, like with
It's
all,
always good to think. Every year's a new plan, right? We used
every
to
year's a
sit
new
down
plan, yes.
when we had acreage. We had 20 acres for a number of years, and we thought this is pre-children that we were going to be selling
a homestead
produce.
family, one of
homestead
those YouTube
family.
homestead families.
Yeah, and that we were going to sell produce at the farmer's market. We had the whole thing. We did end up working at the farmer's market, but we didn't sell produce. We baked bread because we had some very rough conditions on our farm. But in that time period,
water.
we really learned a lot about how you plan every year for a farm. We've worked on several farms that were successful operating farms, unlike our own. And so there was a lot of good things to learn. So even if this is something you do year after year, hopefully you'll get a little bit out of how to think of this in a homeschool light. But you've got some initial questions for them to think about.
Yep.
That you should think about every year. So right now, as you're planning your garden, here's the things that you should think about.
Yeah. So basically the first thing is, is this your first garden? That's the first big question. There, you'll immediately segment and triage people, in one direction or the other. Somebody who has an existing garden versus a new garden. That's always the first thing you have to consider. And once you do that, then you need to think about, okay, how am I going to bring my students into this space? A lot of times these spaces can be very protected. They may be, like the gardens near my parents' house have a lot of deer fencing. Mm-hmm. So they're all 6 feet high and they have gates to get into them. You may have just basic fencing. You may have a young child. You may want to think about how do you allow them into that space with delicate plants? These are just like high level concerns.
Right.
How much space do you want to devote to this?
Do you have, like we do, a 2-year-old who is very grabby and will probably pull young seedlings out of the ground?
She'll pull the seeds and the tomato plants out.
That's right. And we have an older child too. So thinking about, is this your first garden? If this is, how are you thinking about, for your specific family and your ages of your children and temperaments of your children, how you could incorporate them into this activity safely without hurting those precious plants.
Well, yeah, exactly. And, if you are bringing them into the space, maybe they're a little bit older and maybe you want to give them a little bit of responsibility. Are you going to be doing this as a chore? Is it going to be a learning experience, a chores? Is it something that you're giving them free space to plant whatever they want, to care what they want?
Do they get their own little garden,
exactly,
or are they incorporating and helping with what the family is doing? Yeah, so those are very different things, and giving them their own space and saying, okay, you're over here, and this is we will work on your little garden, which we've been talking about what we're going to do with our kids, and we believe that that's the route we're going to go personally because we have such a little one, that we can say, this is your garden, and if things get all messy and there ends up being problems with seedlings getting snapped off when they just have their first blossom of life, then, it's not going to be what our family is going to grow for our summer garden. So that's what we're thinking, that we're going to give our kids each their own dedicated spaces that they can garden in. But maybe that's not going to work for you, or maybe you don't have very much space and you need to do everything together. So really just kind of take a couple minutes and think about what you see as the right avenue for you and your kids.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that it's a very messy thing, and
gardening is messy.
messiness can be a concern for I know there's a lot of homeschoolers who right now are yelling, "No, you just put them in a tuffo and they'll be fine."
I love a tuffo, man.
But you don't want them tromping dirt into the house, which I know our little one will do. Mm-hmm. And you don't want them. Maybe you have a nice patio with a nice deck that you do, entertaining and things like that. And maybe you don't want dirt strewn all over the place. Just those basic considerations to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this goes along with having your kids outside at all.
Exactly.
And how do you manage, kids playing outside and being in the dirt, and what does that look like? Maybe if you're going to be outside and you're going to be gardening more in the dirt, you want to set up like a little wash station outside with an empty tub right next to where the hose is at, and give some sort of kind of protocol of, okay, we always wash our hands and take off our boots and wash our boots off before we come in. This is a great time to go and get your kids some boots and some garden gloves and a few things like that they can strip off. And the first time our daughter went out, when you were just starting messing with some of our blueberries in the backyard, she went out with her tennis shoes and they just got like totally ruined, and she came in, those were her only tennis shoes.
Yeah, exactly.
And we were like, ugh, now I have to wash these and they're wet and the whole thing. So getting them gear, just like you would have the right gear. I mean, we walk out back in our tennis shoes and don't think about it, but kids are messy little creatures. So, give a little bit of thought to your own situation.
Absolutely. So, those are just the basic questions you want to sit down and think about. Just wrap your head around it. You may already have a good idea, but, always considering the various, different multi-factor considerations when it comes to something as complex as doing a garden, giving a whole space to creating something that is delicate and time sensitive and touch sensitive. We do want to make sure we have the right considerations, and how do we protect both your children from what you're doing, and also, protect the plants from your children.
Right. Are you gonna in some way, wall off your garden with small fencing or something so your kids don't end up playing in the garden space?
Sometimes you have animal issues.
Right. Some plants could make your children sick if they eat them raw. So
Exactly.
you might want to think a little bit about what you grow. And if your child is, prone to putting all kinds of things in their mouth. So we have one that totally is and one that is not. So that worked out okay.
So, going from those initial considerations, the next thing you want to think about is, as we kind of alluded earlier, is this is a great experience to learn, right? We always are doing things in the homeschool family when we are incorporating our children into home life, whether it's cooking, whether it's working in the garage, doing car work, whatever it might be. We've heard the millions of stories that there's learning everywhere in the house. Garden is no different. Obviously, we know this. We have biology, we have weather, we have soil science, we have literally, plant physiology. We have everything embedded right there for us. And what's great about it, and what I like about the idea of having a garden and incorporating your learner into that, is, as we said a little bit earlier, is that the summers tend to be periods where we take off on learning, where we take a break.
Or we're
we
doing
gear
something
down.
different.
We do something
or
different, or
lighter.
something lighter. But a lot of families will take a break, and they'll do less in some respects. And even we do the same thing. We go year round, but we do kind of gear it down just a little bit in the summer.
Yeah, because the summers are busy, fun times.
Well, and they're the prettiest time of the year for us here in the Pacific Northwest, and we don't want to miss out on any of that. The opportunities of playing outside and doing fun things. And the garden is a great example of being able to do something fun and enjoyable outside that that gives back to us in a rejuvenating aspect to our lives. We
Absolutely.
can put food on the table, and the happiness of being able to grow something for ourselves, even the children growing something for us, is really nice. So let's talk a little bit about what are the aspects of education that we can see in a garden?
Yeah. So in the very basics, for our youngest learners, teaching counting, measuring, sizes. There can even be geometry with how you're planning out your garden, right? Seeds need to be buried in a certain amount of depth. We need a certain inch spacing. So there's all kinds of great, very early basic counting and measuring and that kind of thing. Reading of the seed packets and the planting guides. So there's all kinds of opportunities to read about how to, not just the seed packet itself, but then how to care for and maintain it. Or when you're picking out seeds, the seed catalog, how do you decide what to buy?
More details on actually how to actually grow that plant.
Right.
It's not just put the seed here and blah, blah, blah. A lot of times you may have to do a little bit more in depth on, here are the types of issues that could come with the plant. I need to learn about that, right? And those type of aspects of actually growing is.
And in the seed catalog, there's 18 varieties of cucumber. Which one do you get and why? And which one's the right one for your soil? So there's a lot of looking at your weather. There's looking up of what's the temperature ranges in your area, how much sun, how much rain do you get. So there's a lot of weather related and planning aspects there too.
Next one would be science. I mean,
so much science
built right into that. You have insect science. You have
lots of bugs,
soil science.
We're always going after earthworms.
Especially if your family does a lot of composting, you can fold in a lot of composting science, breaking down, recycling, reusing, all of that type of aspect of the world outside. I always love the idea that you always go to the store and you get the groceries, or if you go to the farm, if you do a CSA and you get your vegetables, but the aspect of actually watching the product grow outside, and then you bring that in. You're like, it's sort of like when you have a kid at the hospital, and you come home and you're like, I am able to just walk out of here with a kid. It's like, I'm able to just go pick this potato and then cook it
and then eat it. And it came from the ground in my own backyard.
I just
it's a
washed
cool,
it off, and now I'm eating it. It's so strange, right?
It's a
such
really cool feeling. I mean, there's so much science, right? We've got the movement of the sun and migration of birds, pH in your soil,
water.
All of gardening is science. So, any aspect that you want to look at, that you want to pull in, you can do.
And you can accentuate anything in there, right? If you're
composition of your dirt.
Exactly. I mean, if you have a little bit of an older student, maybe you want to get in a little bit of the chemistry of like, okay, this fertilizer, what are the actual nutrients that are breaking down in the soil and becoming bioavailable and being uptake.
Study photosynthesis.
How are they getting into the plant? Maybe planting some plants that are sacrificial so that you can actually pull them out and look at the root development over time. Things of that nature is a really cool thing to do, especially if you're doing like seed starts. You can actually see that happen in real time. That is such an amazing experience to actually see it happen, and to include that with your, some other type of unit study would just, I think, be really illuminating.
Right. You can look at nutrients in plants, vitamins, and how different foods affect our bodies based on the nutrients that they have.
Well, you have the nutrition aspect of all of this.
Absolutely.
Talking about food and what your body needs, your micronutrients, all of those type of aspects, and then kind of align that with the food you're growing, I think is a great way to kind of bring that synergy together. Like, oh, we're going to eat more lettuce greens or more kale because there's, this nutrient versus this nutrient.
Yeah. I think it definitely, one of the things too that gardening helps with is those picky eaters, because you grew it yourself. And so trying more things, if you have kids that are really hesitant to eat vegetables, have them help grow vegetables is a really great way. One of the things I like all about plant science is that in many aspects, gardeners are experimenting. Right? Hey, I bought this kind of topsoil this year, and I'm doing plant starts this year instead of seeds, and I'm watering them with this, and I have this special fertilizer. Right? You're always like testing. There's lots of hypothesis when it comes to gardening, and something that you can so easily do so cheaply is run all kinds of science experiments with your plants. Right? So if you want to talk about the sun and how photosynthesis affects plant growth, then have your student plant X amount of seeds in the sun for most of the day sun, and the other amount half day shade, or how nutrients affect plants. Give them different things to eat, different types of fertilizers. I mean, the amount of different trial and error, and I love
just the idea of planting 4 different tomato plants in 4 different sun combinations and seeing what happens over the course of the summer.
It's like this great long experiment. I mean, what we do in engineering, because I work with engineers, and I have been an engineer for many years.
You're married to an engineer.
Well, I'm married to an engineer. The biggest thing that we do is we say, oh, we've got this problem, or we think we can do something better. And our hypothesis is this, and then we go and we test it. Because even though we know all the principles that, if I do the design this way, this should be much stronger, we can't say that with certainty until we actually do it and test it. Just because it should be, quote unquote, doesn't mean that it is. And so I love anything where our kids get the opportunity to do this hypothesis type work, because this is what the process of inventing and engineering is all about. We know all these principles. We studied it in the book. We think it's going to do this. We've done calculations, and now let's do it and test it and see that it works. And you can take that with any aspect that you want to study. So anything that you choose to do, maybe one bed you put earthworms in and the other bed you don't, and you see how they affect the soil. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways.
Compost on one versus compost on another.
I feel like if you're not going to run an experiment with it, what a missed. Like, I want to run experiments on everything and just see what our kids think is going to happen. What great learning opportunities that is.
Absolutely. Then you can get into more of the practical skills. I love the idea of the hands-on skills.
Right, which we don't get enough of. And there's a blessing in homeschool that we get to do that, right? We get to do hands-on things they wouldn't get to do at school.
Absolutely.
Building raised beds or bird houses.
We're gonna prune the tomato plants and the little suckers that are coming off because we don't want additional branching, or we're going to trim the bottom leaves of our kale and let it continue to grow and not tearing the whole plant out. Just those fine motor skills. You can even get them into building if you're going to do raised beds, if you can find cheap wood, you build some nice raised beds. Yeah. The act of actually building that with your kid is just unbelievable experience, because not only are you taking the, your idea of planning what you're going to do, but then putting it into practice and assembling it, you have a little bit more ownership there. The idea of watering without, drowning, or watering without, underwatering.
Yeah, it's special care.
Those just special care life skills, those hands-on skills, I think are, we lack those, right? In the
Yeah, we don't get to do a lot of that stuff. I know that our girls are really going to look forward to building like a little fairy house in their garden, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
So there's lots of opportunities for arts and crafts, and you can paint the outside of your raised beds, or bird houses if you want to put one in your garden. And so there can be lots of good art opportunities.
The other thing that I like about it is that it's a draw to the outside, whether it's in the morning, if you're going out there and picking off slugs, or in the evening, making sure there's no aphids on your plants, things of that nature, getting yourself out there and really enhancing that outdoor experience. I think what you'll find is if you do a garden, you're going to get fallout effects into your outdoor learning space.
Yeah.
You may actually spend more time outside talking about, the trees you have in the backyard, or the bushes that you have against the house, or the flowers that are blooming over here, or the grass, or questions about, when I dig up, and I check on the potatoes, I dig over here and I found worms over here. Are they the same worms? Well, let's look it up. Like, I think you'll just find more enrichment because you're being drawn outside, and you're going to get that experience of discovery in nature, the discovery in your own backyard, that there's so much there for them to find. I think you're going to see good fallout from learning about other things in your backyard. And I think the garden will help draw that out.
Yeah, I think so. It's always great to have another excuse to spend time outside and have something to work on.
Yep.
I think it's great too to create a connection with nature. It helps for us to appreciate what nature provides for us, and help us to be good environmental stewards as your children grow, and understand why it's so important that we take care of the earth and all of that. By actually being there, physically getting their hands in the dirt, growing things, eating what they grow. It makes a connection I don't think that you can get by just studying it in a book.
Absolutely. Like this week we've been doing our around the world journey. We were studying in Southeast Asia, and we were talking a lot about rice production with my daughter, and she was just blown away how much water is used. And then when water isn't, we watched a video about a guy who dry grows rice, not in paddies, not doing the flood method, and being able to do that in a sustainable way, bringing in that environmentalism, understanding about water and nutrients and fertilizer use. Do we just, put fertilizer on it, or do we use compost? What is the best choice? What are the differences? What are the environmental effects, especially if you guys are going to be gardening in kind of a dry area, talking about water use, talking about water, conservation of water. We live in a very special place of the world where we have a glut of water most of the year, but our summers are actually very dry.
Yeah, they can be.
We will go 30 to 100 days with no rain, and it's kind of crazy to think that Seattle doesn't have rain, but we don't.
Sometimes we don't.
We will have, like last year was a very dry summer for us, and talking about conserving water and not wasting water, and how that applies into your food, thinking about how many times you're watering these plants, how much water you had to put onto that just to grow that tomato, just to grow that leaf of lettuce.
Right. It gives you a new appreciation.
It gives you hopefully it can give that appreciation. That's another aspect of gardening that I think is educational, that you can pull, deeper, more philosophical learning, even at a very young age.
I agree. One of the things that I like the most about it is teaching our children how to make a plan.
Yeah.
Right. A bunch of gardening is planning. Okay, this is the space I have. This is what I want to grow. Here's what I want to grow next to each other. Right, companion planting and things. Or this is the space. And okay, I'm going to trellis beans up the back, and then I'm going to grow other things.
Or
you're
going to just sequentially plant. Like, I'm going to plant lettuce. I'm going to harvest that lettuce. I'm going to have new lettuce ready to go in.
Exactly. What time of year you're going to plant, and you're right. How you're going to harvest and rotate if you do only have small beds. There's a lot of planning, problem solving, organization, all those skills which we can't just put down on a sheet of paper. Oh yeah, I did page such and such of a workbook. But those skills, being able to plan, to organize, to problem solve when you need to, those are huge life skills that, I know we all want our kids to walk away being good at that, because that's going to help them really be successful as adults.
Well, and I think that planning and organization leads into the next thing, which is this idea of responsibility, this personal responsibility, especially if you have assigned them a section of the garden to take care of, or they have their own garden that they're trying to grow. They know they have to show up on a daily basis. They have to care for their plants. It's, it's like having a pet. And
It's cheaper.
It's cheaper pet. And having that kind of that repeated responsibility can help, instill that value that we all are looking
Right.
for, that drive to take care, the drive of responsibility, the drive of doing your chores and doing the responsible thing. A garden can be a great thing for that.
It absolutely can. It also teaches our kids patience. It's really hard in this world of like instant gratification. We have knowledge instantly. I can order something on Amazon, have it tomorrow. I mean, our kids are used to getting things quickly.
But darn it, that corn takes 100 days to grow.
Yeah, it does. I think it teaches them to be patient, to wait. Good things are worth waiting for, that old adage. I think that's true. Gardening is a great way. You cannot rush it. There's nothing you can do to make that tomato grow faster. So you just, you can give it lots of fertilizer and things, but it's going to take a certain amount of time. So I think it's good. Teaches patience, also teaches observation. While they're being patient or impatient and waiting, they're observing how the plant is changing and what's happening to it. That's a whole unit study in itself.
Watching the plant, like understanding
the different stages of it.
The leaves are turning a little bit yellow on the edge. What does that mean? Or they're turning brown, and there's a little bit of a dusty mold on there. What can I put some neem oil to get rid of these bugs?
How can I solve that problem?
Observing it before it gets out of control, right? Observing that something is wrong. And I think I've heard some of the adages around farming where some of the best farmers in the world will know what's wrong by just, seeing that first hint of issues on the edge of the leaves. And they know, okay, I got to come in here and I got to do this or I got to do that.
Yeah, something is not right.
They never let it get to a point where it's such a problem that they're fighting uphill, right? And that's, I think, a lot of that learned skill. But learning that observation thing, something's munching on my strawberries. What is it?
Right.
Oh, it's birds. What if we got some netting to put over then my strawberries are fine, right? Or where all my blueberries are being eaten by the birds, or these slugs are eating my lettuce. How do I take care of that?
Right. And then there's a whole, making, like, okay, we have slugs. All right. Are we going to use copper line? Are we going to use a saucer full of beer? Or, there's all kinds of different ways that you can deal with slugs, for example. But then you've got to put that plan into action too.
Or doing the hard work, which is the next one, just doing the hard work and going out there every night and picking as many slugs as you possibly can and taking down that pressure.
I don't want to count the number of nights. You guys, we went out into our greenhouse or out into our fields, and we had these buckets, just like big buckets.
The 5 gallon Home Depot buckets.
And we would take
fill them like
we would
halfway.
have like smaller pots. What were they? Quart pots or something. And we would, with our gloves, and we would pick slugs at night, and then we'd dump them into the 5 gallon bucket at the end. And we would toss them way far away from the garden. We had like 20 acres of slugs that converged on our,
some of those nights we were just staring at each other like, oh man, I wish they find the cure to aging is somewhere in slugs. We'd be rich.
Right. We would pick hundreds of slugs
every single night.
And that's when we realized that maybe this property wasn't going to work out. But, it's a lot of hard work getting out there and weeding and caring for your plants and watering them.
I need to raise ducks.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. It's a lot of hard work, and
along that hard work is success and failure. And I think
absolutely,
one of those great life lessons we always want to, let our kids feel is the railings of failure. Let them grind along that, and then rescue them right at the end. And that builds character, builds perseverance. My boss always crudely used to tell me, he goes, I'll give you enough rope to let you hang yourself, but I'll rescue you right as you're falling. And knowing that I had that responsibility, knows that I could fail. And the failure is so scary that I'm going to work really hard to try to succeed. And, understanding that.
Not that we want gardening to be a tense and anxiety-ridden thing. That made it sound like big penalties.
Sweetie, if you don't grow the food, we won't have any food to eat. No.
I think
stakes are pretty low. Stakes are pretty low.
They are. It is hard work.
But even at a 6-year-old level, if their flowers get munched, they feel like they failed somehow.
Well, right. They won't get those flowers to put on the table later.
Yeah, exactly.
And, or that lettuce. I mean, think about the reward that you get from harvesting your own lettuce and serving it for lunch. I mean, our kids are going to be able to do that this summer. They're going to be able to harvest things from their garden, and we're going to be able to eat that. I think that's such a reward for all that hard work and that perseverance. I think it's going to teach our kids a lot of grit, right? Grit is I almost feels a little bit intangible, but I feel like this is going to teach them that
it's really unobtainable sometimes. It feels like
right, that they have to stick it out, that it's difficult. This isn't an easy thing to do. Where it's just, I mean, it's funny, the seed planting part's always really easy, right? You get the little seed pods, usually like the little Jiffy starts or whatever, and put water on them, and oh, they look so cute. And then you poke a little seed in them, and you're like, this was so fun, And then the little cotyledon leaves come up. And you're like, oh, look, everything's growing. This is amazing. And you plant it, and then it's like, oh,
sunburnt, died.
yeah, or didn't get enough water, or the soil pH was wrong, or weeds choked it out, or slugs ate it, or whatever. It's like, then it all becomes really real.
He never had a shot.
It's not an easy thing to do always, depending on what you grow. But I think it teaches our kids a lot of things. And sometimes what I think is interesting, you're good at this, right? You know how to garden. I'm like not a good gardener. I don't know how to garden. I don't have a green thumb or anything. And when I grow things just myself, you have to come and rescue me often. But, sometimes we're all going to fail. Sometimes we and our kids, we're going to learn together this skill of how to grow our own food or to grow flowers or whatever it is we want to grow. Sometimes that's not going to work out for any of us. And we are going to fail. And I think that's going to teach us something valuable too about getting back up and making a different plan for the next year or the next time that we can plant too.
So let's talk a little bit of the advice, when you're gardening with the kids. I think the first thing you want to do is be upfront and set boundaries with your kids, especially if you have a garden that is more mature and you've put a lot of capital, life capital into it.
Yeah.
And you have plans and you've been doing it a lot and they've always watched from outside the fence. And when you're actually bringing them in, this could be an important space for you. And so they need to respect that. Or if you're creating something new, like, okay, I'm not going to let you in my garden, but I'll give you this. I'll make you a new little garden and we'll call it your garden. Setting up the boundaries and having them understand what they're getting themselves into, what are going to be the expectations? What are the responsibilities? Being upfront, I think, is really important because I think that, when you remind them that, hey, you got to go weed your garden. You got to go water your plants. It's 1:00 in the afternoon. They haven't been watered today. They're going to be suffering today. Don't make your plants suffer. Right. So, giving them those responsibilities and setting up those boundaries, I think would probably be a real good first start, especially when you're bringing in those kids. Yeah,
settle on, what role you want them to take in the garden or in their own garden, and especially with the little ones, really setting those boundaries. Because, gardens, while they're really great, can also be places that aren't safe.
Exactly.
So, there are stakes in the ground, there are trellises to hang tomatoes, there are things that wouldn't necessarily be safe. So
and sometimes
we have to be careful with our little ones.
Yeah, with us hobby farmers, we'll have a lot of debris and materials in those areas, so it may not be safe for the young ones to water around.
Right. We want to do our best, obviously, to keep things safe. But raised beds and things, there's
nails.
There's sharp corners. There could be. You got wood, you got splinters and stuff. So I think it's really important to go over safety with your kids before you get out there and say, when we garden, we always wear our gloves, for example.
Ask yourself, does a parent need to be present?
Right. How old are your kids? Do you need to be there with them? Don't ever leave a child unattended in a garden because bad things will happen. Make sure that you have the right gear and that they know the rules, because sometimes outside is almost like a free-for-all. As long as they don't hit each other, they can kind of do anything in our backyard usually. But there are rules around our garden beds, and they know what those rules are. And so it's very important that you think on what you want those to be before you get them out there and really set those ground rules.
And a lot of those ground rules may change over the season, especially when there becomes, fruiting plants, especially when things are growing and they're at kind of a sensitive time. You want to be able to articulate that and say, hey, the tomato plants are going to be putting off their flowers this week. I want you to just go ahead and flick every single one you see, but don't tear them off, because that's where the tomatoes are coming from. Educating them along the process on what they can and cannot do is not just something you do up front, but it actually is something you may have to do along the way.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think the other thing with all of this too is that you have to remember, if you want to garden with your kids, you're making a commitment as well as you're asking them to, be responsible and grow too. That this is something that you have to think about too. This does take daily, weekly. Maybe you water daily and you weed once a week, or this takes effort.
Using the analogy of a pet. right? Like,
Right.
oh, you wake up every day and you've got to, feed your dog. You got to take them outside. You got to take them for a walk. You got to do all these type of things,
Right.
and your plants are no different than that. You have to really care for them, just like you do with the house. Treat
Right.
them like family.
Well, and that really may have an influence. How much time do you have to devote? How much time do you and your kids have to devote to this? May make a huge difference on the plants that you decide to grow. There are some things that are very, very intensive and need a lot of special care and attention, and other things that they'll grow in an apocalypse, And so you might want to just really think about how hardy different things are, especially one thing to think about if you have kids that are, prone to getting into things. Maybe you start growing some like more rooting vegetables, things. It's very tempting for a child to pick a tiny little cute green tomato before it becomes a real tomato we can eat. But potatoes under the ground, they get the opportunity to grow nice and big because our kids can't see that fruit. So depending on the age of your kids, and just think about, this is a big commitment as a family, and how much time you have and how much care you're willing to give into the garden. Because it would be really, I worry about this too when we start our garden. I don't want to get into something that is so much that we can't then keep up with it, because then we've done the opposite of, teaching them grit and responsibility and all this stuff, because we've fallen down on the commitment that we made to the garden.
Yeah, right.
So, one of the things that I would definitely say if you're starting and this is your first year is to start small and start with things that are very hardy and easy to grow. Don't take on too much. It can be very, very exciting, but just something to think about with your kids. We want to set a great example for our kids, and if we can't keep up with it, that that doesn't set a good precedent.
So that's basically getting your mind right for starting up growing, your own little garden, and including your kids. Next week on Monday, we'll release another episode, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the, more of the details, kind of like
this is the overview episode. Yeah. The next one is like the exactly what to plant and how to think about it, and
think about what to grow.
It's the Master Gardener episode.
How to grow, all the gardening costs, the gardening size, things of that nature. We'll kind of go into a lot of different ideas and things to think about when you actually start making your selections.
You're going to be teaching me. It's like a mini Master Gardener course.
Not really.
I've seen the notes, y'all. They're really good. And I'm very excited to hear what you have to say about the different sizes and costs. And I'm excited.
We will all sit down and grow a $78 tomato. It'll be wonderful.
I feel like this is the same thing when I sew. Like I remember I made...
no, it's like...
I was like,
It's like whenever you try to make tikka masala at home and scratch, you're like, oh, I'm going to make tikka masala. I'm like, oh gosh, that's going to cost $180 to make this meal.
It's like when
I gotta go get all this spice. I gotta get a half a teaspoon of this spice, but it only comes in 1 pound boxes.
Yes, I was like, oh, I'm gonna sew these placemats. They're gonna be the prettiest placemats. They did turn out really nice. I think that those placemats each cost me like $30. They were the most expensive placemats ever, because by the time I bought all this expensive material and the batting and all the pieces and yes, so we're going to go over things with you and hopefully help you to not grow a $78 or $78 tomato.
$78 tomato. So let's end it the way we always edit, something that we're into. We have been watching Making Fun on Netflix. We're 2 episodes in. This is a DIY maker show geared towards very cynical, sarcastic parents and kids who love watching silly things being made.
Yes.
It is like the perfect synergy of like a fart joke meets, This Old House.
Yeah. Or like BattleBots isn't really right, but it's something like that.
It has the element of BattleBots,
a little
bit more like youthy humor.
So basically, kids, there's these 4 maker guys,
five.
Okay. They all have different skills, and kids challenge them to make something. So like the one episode we watched, the kid wanted them to make a unicorn bicycle that farted glitter.
Yeah, but the farting glitter was a twist at the end that they had to put in at the last minute.
Regardless,
it's very important.
At the end, there were unicorn bicycles that farted glitter. So the point is, it's really funny. Like our kids are cracking up at what they have to build, but then there's a ton of engineering and actual real craft skills about how they're going to make this impossible thing. And that's the place where there's a lot of education in this show. And so it's all about, well, exactly how are we going to rig that up? Okay, well, we need to make a fart glitter cannon. Okay, how are we going to do that? And talking about how they put it together and all of the craftsmanship involved with making all the different pieces. That's all really cool. My one niggly thing about it is
it could be a little bit more adult for some people's
no,
sensibilities.
it's a little bit sarcastic. So I would say we do watch this with our 6-year-old and she's fine with it and knows that it is in jest. But the kind of the shtick of the show is that the main guy is a grump that doesn't like kids. That's kind of his character on the show. And so he uses phrases like, well, we got to make what these brats want us to make and things like that. Yeah. So,
but the other 4 guys are actually,
they're all very nice. It's just
nice.
The one guy. And that's his character, that he begrudgingly makes these crazy things for kids. So just be sensitive to that if you're really sensitive to that kind of language. There was no bad language, but it was just that kind of thing. Like, oh, I hate kids. They're making me make this thing. So our daughter is old enough, and we kind of explained to her that that's what this guy is. That's his thing that he does. Yeah. So she understands that. But if your kids are sensitive to that or you don't like that, we just want to give that little caveat because I think that when I first heard it, I was like, wait, what are you guys watching in there? Because I don't like the way that this guy talks sometimes. And it was like, oh no, we already talked with our daughter about it. And you told me how I talked with her, and she knows that this guy's just playing a part and this is his part. I think that this would be best for kids who were
a little bit older,
like kind of 10 maybe, right? Yeah. In that range, 9, 10 or older. Because we really enjoyed watching how they made these things. It was actually very, very interesting. And couldn't be old enough to understand the humor of this guy's character.
It's also wonderfully shot. It's very funny. They do a lot of funny slow motion cut segments and graphics, and it is from an enjoyability on the way they filmed it and they shot it and they produced it. It's just really top notch. It's really well done for such a simple little reality TV show, themed show. It's really well done. I was actually very surprised that the first 10 minutes I was hooked. Like I was like, if this is how the show's going to go, this is really cool.
Yeah, it's really neat. And the projects that they make are outlandish and they're based completely on children's ideas, which is really cool. I think I would say if you're on the fence, maybe you watch one episode and see if you can take the main guy and if that's okay with you and your kids are all right. Our kids he only does that
like once in a while. Like most of the time he's trying to solve the problems and he's talking with them on how to build it and they're going through the problem solving. Yeah. They never have the kind of like Orange County choppers thing where they're yelling at each other.
Oh no, there's none of that kind of
very
stuff.
Positive nature while they're building. Sometimes there's a little bit of a competition between like 2 teams, but they're never mean about it or anything.
Right, but I mean he'll say stuff like, "Well, that's just a stupid idea," to the other team. So there's some of that like language, and so just be aware of it. That's why I think that it's better for a slightly older child who totally understands that that's just a shtick and isn't going to then repeat that around the house. And our daughter so far has been all right. She understands that it's just a character that they're playing. Yeah. But we just wanted to give that note to you because otherwise the show is really great, but there is that little caveat to it.
Exactly.
So Making Fun on Netflix has got some cool engineering and maybe a little rude humor. Thanks so much for joining us today and making us a part of your homeschool journey. Please engage with us on social media. Join our Homeschool Together podcast group on Facebook and find us at Homeschool Together Podcast on Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback, questions, and recommendations. Until next time.
Happy homeschooling!